Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Andy Ruiz Jr., the former unified champion, is set to make his long-awaited return to the ring. April 24th, he is set to face Chris Arreola, and this is reportedly going to be on pay-per-view. So I'll get to the piece from BoxingScene.com, and then there's quite a few different things I want to traverse through, including the pay-per-view question, because this is reportedly a pay-per-view fight. And I'm sure some people would have spat out their coffee at the mention of pay-per-view for this sort of fight, but we'll get to it, talk about it, because yeah, I'm not convinced, but it's certainly a heat check for Andy Ruiz Jr. and his popularity, or potentially lack thereof. But anyway, the BoxingScene.com article says the fight will take place April 24th on Fox Sports pay-per-view from a location to be determined, multiple sources informed BoxingScene.com. The bout has been in discussion for more than a year and has been given clearance to land on the spring schedule. So Chris Arreola versus Andy Ruiz Jr. April 24th, as the report says. So I guess first off, and I'll get to the pay-per-view stuff soon enough, a little bit later on in the video, but April the 24th, that'll be almost 18 months since Andy Ruiz Jr. was in the ring, and it will be good to see him back in there because we were meant to see him in 2020, the second half of the year, and then all of a sudden it was sort of pushing out to November, and it quietly all just sort of disappeared. No mention of it, and pushed into 2021, 6 months on from the November date that it was rumoured for. So good to have a date and actually something to aim for there. And Ruiz, he has been actually since his last fight, which was the end of 2019, his loss to Anthony Joshua, quite a few things have changed for him. He's now in a new training camp with Eddie Reynoso. He's training with the likes of Canelo, also Ryan Garcia. Frank Sanchez is in that camp. There's a number of other top fighters as well. So it's going to be good from the standpoint, is he going to be rejuvenated, motivated? Beforehand, he said he wasn't really training hard. He was blowing off training, and as we know, he stacked on the beef ahead of that fight, the second fight with Anthony Joshua, seemingly thinking it didn't matter what he did, he was going to get the job done. How wrong he was. But now he has a chance to sort of put himself back on the sort of straight and narrow and actually get in a disciplined camp, an environment. Not saying that it wasn't with Manny Robles, but clearly Andy Ruiz Jr. as the top dog in that gym was taking liberties. In this camp with the likes of Canelo and others, he is not the biggest name in the room. And if he does sort of start to fall out of line, they're going to try to put him back in there, or they will show him the door. But I'm interested to see what Eddie Reynoso, because bearing in mind they've been working together now for a number of months, and we have seen that Ruiz is actually getting in better shape. So this is just from the other day on Instagram, Andy Ruiz Jr. sharing this, so you can see he looks like he has been getting in better shape, although I'm a little bit reluctant to say how much better shape he's in, because clearly with something like this, you can tell angles are involved here. But he has dropped some beef from the 283 pounds he was from the Joshua fight, or at least he looks like he has. I mean, I think he is sort of thinner through the face and other sort of parts of his body. But it's going to be good to see him in better shape, motivated, and coming to fight, and see what Eddie Reynoso can sort of add to his game. I mean, not expecting too much for this fight. I mean, it's only been a number of months, but there may be one or two things that he can have imparted that perhaps we will see in the ring and go, okay, well, that looks like that's the work of Eddie Reynoso. In terms of the fight itself, it's going to be against Chris Arreola, who by the time of the fight is going to be 40 years old. And Areola's best days, they were a decade ago. He has been in some fun fights of late. Adam Kovnatsky springs to mind. But at the end of the day, Chris Arreola's pretty long in the tooth now. It'll be a fun fight. He'll give it a go. It will be entertaining with a style matchup, I'm sure. There's going to be lots of punches thrown. But it is only going to end with one victor, and that's Andy Ruiz Jr. And even Ruiz himself, at the time he was talking about his next fight, said it was going to be a tune-up. And this is a high-level tune-up. So he said he was going to have a tune-up first back after the Joshua loss, and then he'd be looking to face someone maybe like a Luis Ortiz. So you have the backdrop of 40-year-old faded, washed Chris Arreola, whose game but is going to get beaten. And then you have this going to be on pay-per-view. So for me, it's certainly a question. Is this really pay-per-view worthy? It feels to me like a real heat check that they want to sort of just, take the temperature here of what does Andy Ruiz Jr. have in terms of pay-per-view marketability. Can he actually pull in the buys? This one here, this was a long talked about fight, but really it should have happened 5 or 6 years ago. In 2021, I think that the level of interest for it probably has diminished considerably from where it once was. I'm sure there will be, maybe a couple of 100,000 buys, something like that. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, is that optimistic? I don't know. I mean, considering the prices, it's kind of like if Deontay Wilder fought Chris Arreola now. There wouldn't be much demand for that sort of fight either. It's just someone like an Andy Ruiz Jr. and I think a Deontay Wilder to some extent too. They need the dance partner. If it was Ruiz and Wilder, that's a big fight. But Ruiz and Areola, that's just okay. That's just a fight night, not a pay-per-view in my view. So I'm not convinced about how well it's going to do, but I'm looking forward to seeing Ruiz in the ring. I think this will be a fun fight for however long it goes, but a pay-per-view, when you consider Ruiz is coming off 18 months of inactivity, he's coming off a loss, and his opponent is a pretty, well-trodden 40-year-old Chris Arreola. Make of that what you will, but Andy Ruiz Jr. set to return to the ring April 24th. What do you make of it all? Is it pay-per-view worthy? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.